Hi, I'm Paula Carvalho. I'm an editor at a literary magazine, Quatro Cinco Um, and I'm very pleased to be here as an invitation from Editora Tabla, and with the support of Quatro Cinco Um. We are here to talk to Abdourahman Waberi, who was born in Djibouti in 1965, and 20 years later, he moved to France, where he studied English literature and became one of the most important uh, writers in the Francophone world. He writes for the newspaper Le Monde, and he won in June this year um, the gold medal from the Francophone world for his literary work, and it is his first book being translated in Brazil, and we hope it's the first of many. So thank you very much to be here, Abdourahman, and we're very pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Paula, and I'm very pleased to be in your company. And thank you for everything so far.
So his first book to be translated in Brazil is Porque Você Dança Quando Anda, who was originally published in French in September 2019, and is going to be translated in English in a few months, as he told us before, and it's a very beautiful book about a girl who asks his father, why does he dance when he walks? So the first question that I like to make you, Abdul, is because you're from Djibouti, is the first book we think of a Djibouti author here in Brazil as well to be translated. So it's a landmark for us, and I would like to ask you about what is the memory do you have of your country, so that we in Brazil here, who really don't know much about Djibouti, to start to think about how is this country, and the story of the country is also very present in this book. The father of the girl tells her about his life, but also about the history of the country. And so, what is the country of your memory that you remember?
Yeah, Paula, you're really right because this book it's a conversation between a child, and she's around 8 or 9, and a father who's in his mid 50, maybe yeah, close to 50. And then this father has an issue. He has a physical problem, and the child have noticed for so long, since maybe she was 3 or 4, and she had heard some people, family members commenting that issue, and then she was, she was protecting him. But at some point, the child, she's very curious. She wants to know why her father is behaving this way. And then at some point she say, Papa, why are you working, why are you dancing while you are working? Because his way of walking and his way of, yeah, he has a physical issue anyhow. And then why you walk this way, kind of. And this question can be seen as a very crude and very tough way. But children, they also mix tenderness and roughness. They can be kind and rough, cruel and warm and welcoming at the same time. So this father say, okay, I have been hiding this issue for so long. Maybe it's now the time I can talk about that for myself, from my children, my family, and maybe from the wider audience and the readers. So the question is how he became, who is he? And because he lives in France, in a diasporic, in exile, kind of, in distance from his country, then it's also a way to introduce the country, Djibouti, to this his own child, daughter. So I'm mixing the narrator. He's mixing his own life with the life of his past, and as a child, and then anyway, he's intermingling, the stories that happened in Africa when he was a child himself, and his own story. So this is the what we say in French, the big story with H, capital H, la grande histoire, and la petite histoire, the small story. What in English you may say history and story. So those two directions are coming together, and the narrative is about that. So basically, what I'm saying is that this novel is also a way of coming back myself as a writer, at this time as a person, coming in terms with my story. And so I was offering that to my daughter. It's a kind of love letter to my daughter, and I explain why I work this way and why I also left my country some 25 years or 35 years ago. And so it's a way of coming in terms with personally and also politically. So the country I'm talking about is Djibouti, and maybe in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, say, what's Djibouti? So Djibouti has this particularity to be in the eastern part of Africa. Brazilian knows the western part of Africa, of course, because they have historical linkage, and for example, with the Yoruba culture or from Congo culture. So, and also because of the language, Brazilian may know something about Angola, Mozambique, Cabo Verde, but you don't know the other side. You don't know the eastern coast, and the eastern coast is from Ethiopia to maybe Mauritius to Mozambique, and then to South Africa. So the eastern side, what we call the East Africa, is also has a close relationship with the Arabic world. It's also Muslim. For example, Northeast is Muslim. So I came from this part of Africa. It's in Africa, but we have a Muslim culture, and we have sometimes also what we might call an Oriental culture and flavor. So that's why in Tabla, this Editora, it's also interested in what we call the Arab world or the Muslim world. So I am in the intersection between Africa and what we might call the East or the Oriental culture.
And everyone who's watching, you can already buy the book in Tabla's website. Is already, you can buy. It's a very beautiful book. I recommend, and it's very sensitive and talks about very sensitive issues like colonialism, the French invasion, and the fights among the English, and the influence of Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the Egyptian president in the independence. So it's a very interesting how you, like I said, you intermingle the story of the country, the history of the country, to Aden, who's the protagonist story. How did you organize that, and how did you talk about this very heavy issues with such a light tone, because you're talking to a child, right?
Yeah, that was the challenge. For every project, or let's say every book, you have to find a new way of a new language, and also a new way of telling. A new narrative. What we call in French the conteur. Which is the traditional way of telling. In Africa we have those traditional way of telling stories, and I guess you have also in Brazil and elsewhere. It's what we call the oral tradition. So of course I am trying to get inspiration from that culture, because I write in French, but I'm not a Western. I'm not a French Cartesian mind. I am an African mind. So I mixed everything. I mixed what is the historical elements and what it might be the biographical and the intimate elements, and I mixed very easily on purpose, but also because this is the way it is, because we don't separate history and stories and so on and so forth. So, for example, I was very much influenced by my grandmother, who is a representative of the African culture, the ways they, and this is also my real. Also, I'm very inspired by my true grandma. So I'm just trying to tell my daughter, or let's say the narrator tells his daughter the way he was behaving with his grandma. It's a kind of generation. So my grandma was a very strong woman, a very African woman, and she was actually the keeper of the house. Even my father was the small boy, and she was the boss. And she was the way. And I try to tell my daughter, because for example, sometimes in Europe people say, well, African women, no, no, Africans is underdeveloped, Africa, so on, so. And I say, okay, but this is what they say, But if you go to Africa, you will see beautiful women, strong women, and they don't have to have, those. They don't even have to have formal education. They don't even have to speak English or Spanish or Portuguese or French. They are the true bosses of the place, the strong women of the culture. So I have been informed by that. So I'm trying to just, easily to tell my daughter what I have gotten in my from my parents also. So it's for me it's a transmission novel. It's a love letter novel. So it was not complicated. I have made more complicated books in my past where I was more formal, right? But this time is just was straightforward. And what I wanted is to keep the quality of the emotion. I didn't want it to be impressive, in formal way or in a literary way, I don't know, in a la Proust or a la blah blah blah. I wanted to keep the depth and the freshness of the emotion.
And you talked about your grandmother. I wanted to ask you about the how the character of the grandmother is very important to the protagonist, and the way that he articulates her her oral knowledge, her wisdom, let's just say, with the knowledge that he learns from books, because this is something that sometimes we think, oh, you need to separate one thing from the other, and one is better than the other. But here he shows how that makes him a whole, and both of those worlds. Let's just say that. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like that's how you work as well, how you see the world?
Yeah, I have this nostalgia because my grandma she passed at a very old age. She was maybe 90 something, but anyhow, she was the how do you say the keeper of this wisdom, uh, because she was true to the culture of the past. I mean, the African culture of the past, at least to this part of the world, in what we call Djibouti, and some of the knowledge, some of the tradition, even the language, and the philosophy, it's somehow lost to us. I mean, to our younger generation, because we came from the nomadic society to the urban society, and then the urban society to the colonized society. So she was in her own, lifetime. She was a true, lively testimony of the past. For example, she never have had a watch, and she knew precisely what time it was, or what time, yeah, what part of the day we are, because her own cosmology, her own body was moving in accordance, to the position of the sun, you know, and she knew this is the morning period, before noon, then afternoon, then, and so her whole body was in harmony with that. And she will say, oh, this time you have to go this way, for example, when it's the break of the night, or when it's the dawn, there are certain things you cannot do at those because the spirit were coming and visiting the places. Those are kind of. And for as a child, I was amazed. Say because she would say you don't have to lie at this time. At 6 in the evening you cannot lie because you are likely to die, or kinds of those. And she was saying the others, the invisible spirits are living with us. And she, come on, I don't see anything. So she was a lively, body, and a lively culture, and she was amazing. So I was as a child, I was going to see her because I was more impressed by her than by my father or my mother. So
Yeah.
that was for me, and I wanted to capture. That's why I was giving this conversation to my daughter because I wanted to keep something of part of that culture, because the culture of my father was already close to me. He was an urbanized guy, but she was a truly nomadic, and then she became half urbanized. So in three generation, there were a dynamism of culture that was at stake, and part of that culture, African culture, was somehow lost to us now.
So, do you tell your grandmother stories to your daughter
Say it
nowadays?
again, sorry.
Do you tell the stories that you heard from your
Yeah, yeah,
grandmother to
sure.
your daughter?
Yeah, absolutely. I told her part of it because my that was my grandma, but she knows my mom, who's now her grandma, and though her grandma lives in Djibouti, she sometimes discuss with her on phone, and they understand half, let's say, but all the emotional quality is not, it's not coming through words, it's coming from the eyes, the silences and laughs and so on, so laughter and so on, so on. So they have she has a strong connection, but without uh, expressing words and
Mhm.
expression languages. Yeah, but so I tell her, you have seen your grandma. And my grandma, she was even much more, impressive than my mom. So that is what I want to keep, because I want to, because I'm not living in France, I'm not living in Djibouti, so I want to keep that culture and transmit to my daughter.
Yeah. And we talked about earlier before we came here to the live about how nomadism is very important in your work and in your life. You have a lot of books that they're not translated yet in Brazil. Hope in the future. And I'd like to know more about how do you think about nomadism, and how is that part of Djibouti culture. And you talked a lot about it already, but I it's very interesting because we talked about, you said that you are a nomad, so you're living in
Yeah.
France, but you teach in the US, and now you're now in Italy at this moment, so you're always traveling.
Yeah, but traveling and nomadism, it's a metaphor of, for me, life and creation. Actually, it's also the metaphor of life. Life. If you don't have movements in life, you don't have physics. The quantum physics explain that, because if you immobility is not life. So anyhow, when I was growing up, so I was busy learning French, for example, because the language of the school and the language of the culture, I mean the administration, it's in French. I was speaking in my homestead, in my house, with my mom and my grandma and so on, so in Somali. And there is also another language called Afar, who is the second African language spoken in Djibouti. And then you have the school, and then for the school you have to speak French. And so you have Somali, and then Afar, the African language. Then you have Arabic, especially the Arabic of Yemen, because a part of the Djiboutians are from Yemen descent, because Yemen is just in front of. So you have Somali, Afar, and Arabic. Those are the local languages. And then the French, which is the school language. So you are going through those, linguistic universes in a matter of day, because I was living in my shantytown, because I'm a shantytown boy, I'm a ghetto boy. So when you are living in the shantytown, you were speaking in Somali, Arabic, and Afar, and then you're going to school and you were speaking French, because I was not raised by a French-speaking family, which is bourgeois. That is would have been the bourgeois. So though I became now a bourgeois because I'm teaching in the university, I was raised in a shanty town. So for me, I was already traveling and making nomadism through culture and through classes and through languages. So that is amazing for me. Uh, yeah, of course, Safa. uh, and I wanted to, because the true nomadism, let's say the ecosystem of nomadism is disappearing because of the climate change and the urbanization of Africa and East Africa and the Sahel. So nowadays, the true nomads are not themselves true; they are partly urbanized. They're living close to the city. So even when you have camels and your beasts, your sheep, and all the nomadic framework, you still they're still living close to the cities. So which means that the traditional nomadism is going to kind of at least disappear or to become suburbanized. So that's why I'm telling my grandma and the people before my grandma were the true nomads. So I kept some of the culture, uh, and I put it in my literature. And interesting enough, if you go to the other side of the Red Sea, if you go, for example, in Arabi Saudi, or what we call the peninsula, it's also the same thing, in Saudi Arabia or in Qatar or in Emirates. The true nomads also have became urbanized, because nowadays, Dubai or Emirati or Saudi Arabia are very rich cities and country, so they just kept, that they have this memory of, of camels and caravans, but they have now jeeps and of course planes and air flight and whatever. They're very much modern, but they have this culture of, the desert, the oases, and the poetry, of course, because when you're living in nomads, we are a people of truly poetic. So all this is becoming, it's coming from our mind, but it's not really lived on a daily basis, and at least it's not really lived for someone from my, let's say, uh, uh, age, or maybe also, yeah, my age. Yeah.
And you write poetry as well, right?
Sure, yeah,
Abdullah,
absolutely.
and there are some poetry in the book as well. And was it inspired by this nomadic poetry from your ancestors, or what are your other literary references as well? Because it's
Yeah,
very erudite here. There are a lot of writers and thinkers in your book as well that
yeah,
you
but
talk about.
again, this book is also, as I said, it's not really formal. It was
Mhm.
not really complicated for me, at least. Maybe the reader will say it's still complicated, but anyhow, I wanted this book to be a conversation between a child and his father and her father. But of course, it's as even if I'm not paying attention, the way I see my influences, it's coming through. So as I said, I have different languages. I come from different cultures, but I also have, as a person, human being, I am someone who is always, in crossings, and who is in different cultures. For example, I love cultures. I love literature. I love all kinds of, stories. So I'm mixing everything without even paying attention. So someone will say, for example, we are talking about. I don't know, Mahmoud Darwish, for example, the Palestinian poets. Someone who I admire. You were talking about Jamal Abdel Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, or Jamal Abdel Nasser, the head state of Egypt in the 60s. but he was inspiring many millions of people in Africa, in East Africa, let's say. And so he was a hero for the generation of my father. My father used to actually, I live in Djibouti. I was born in a place that it's called Boulevard Jamal Abdel Nasser. So so that is yeah. So it's for us. It's currency. It's something that is so normal to have Jamal Abdel Nasser or Habib Bourguiba, for example, from Tunisia. So those are the heroes of the Arab world, what we used to call the, uh, the Arab world of the 70s.
Alexandre is asking here, and how is the relationship between the citizens of Djibouti and Somaliland, the neighbor of the West, given that there are so many Somalis in Djibouti?
Yeah, because
And,
Djibouti is, yeah.
No, just one more message. Alexandre dos Santos is going to be, he's a professor in international relations in PUC Rio, and he's going to be in a second live from Tabla, in Tabla's Instagram, I think, talking about Djibouti because of your book.
Wow.
So he's,
Obrigado. Yeah, but Djibouti is it's a piece of, it used to be called French Somaliland, because Djibouti is part of what we call, let's say it this way, you have the culture, where you have Somalis, you have Somalis in Djibouti, but you have Somalis in Somalia, and now you have different Somalia. You have Somaliland, and southern Somalia, and then you have millions of Somalis actually in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is also especially in the eastern in the eastern part of Ethiopia, there are millions of Somali. Somali language is the fourth language in Ethiopia itself, and you also have Somalis in Kenya, northern part of Kenya. So you find Somalis in different countries. So all those Somalis have the same culture. They speak the same language. They are almost 100% Muslims. They are in the same, let's say, ethnicity, because they divide themselves into clans, what we call clans. So from, let's say, Djibouti to northern Kenya, you have the same people. And then the colonialism divided into different pieces. So you have the Italian Somalia, which was the British Somaliland, which became Somaliland, the French Somaliland, which became Djibouti, and the two pieces that remain in Ethiopia and in Kenya. So we have let's say we have the same culture, we have the same language, and yet we are divided into different countries and citizenship. So nowadays, the relation between Somaliland and Somalia, Djibouti, for example, they are so close. They are not in the same country, but they are so close, and they have let's say the closest relationship possible. The only problem is that Somaliland is not recognized by the international community. So they cannot have a full connection by the UN or so on and so forth. But no, they are the same people actually. They speak the same language. As I said, they are the same people, that they have different citizenship.
Oh, great. And what about because religion is also very present in your book. They're very different religions. You have Muslims, you have Christians, and you have the local languages, the African religions as well. And how do you treated that in your book when you wrote it?
Well, in the point was not really focusing on specific. I was just making my novel, right? As I said, what is expressed in my novels becomes from the culture. So I'm not trying to make in a rational way. This is So let's say that there is maybe two. Actually, the three religions that you said are present. The French and Ethiopian are the Catholics and the Christian in the region, and then the majority are Muslim. And in my childhood, at least, there used to be very open Muslim society. Nowadays, they became more, because of the geopolitics, they became more uh, strict Muslim practices. But in my childhood, all those were open, and you were crossing as someone who is from the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, and then you meet someone who is a Roman Catholic, and then there was even a few Jewish community, So all those were intermixed, and the only thing that you were hearing was the museum, the addim of the Muslim five.
Yeah.
That was, I say, this is okay. This is our Muslims, So
Mm.
this is nowadays is a bit different, I believe, but I'm no longer in living. So for me, I was also interested by the African tradition practices, and those are now kind of in the hide, because they, some, for example, don't consider that to be very strictly Muslim, or they just say, this is, we don't do this anymore, for example. But as a writer, as someone who's indulging in the business of imagination, I'm very much interested. So let's say practically in this part of the world, they will say, "Oh, we are Muslim. We don't do that anymore." But then you have to scrap the surfaces, and then you see truly animistic practices. For example, ways of which you pay attention to the certain period of the day, as I said, because of the nomadism. But some trees, the spirit of the tree, the spirit of the stone, the spirit of the thunder, all those telluric and magical, coming from the earth, right? Telluric celebrations. Uh, and people just say, "Oh, no, no, this is not really religion. We just believe in Allah." Are we are really? And then he say, "Yeah, yeah, I know, I know." but this is now disappearing. Let's say in the open. But in the time of my childhood, at least in the time of my discussion with my grandma, you will see those that were not really Muslim tradition. They were coming from deep below, and they were truly African traditions. But people were just not being aware and just saying, this is the way we do for.
I found very funny. There's the character of the ant, and she says Saint Aisha, and for the wife of Muhammad the Prophet. And I was like, oh, that is very interesting. That is very interesting, because there are no saints theoretically in Muslim.
Yeah, yeah, of
In
course,
Islam.
the ways we intermixed, because we also have that in many places where, for example, the practices of African tradition, where African religion was forbidden, people will just say, "Oh, this is Christianism," and so Santa Barbara will become Ogun, or
Yeah.
so and so. Yemanja become some another. You replay Yemanja with a let's say European, let's say Roman Catholic goddess, and then right, so Santa Maria will become Yemanja, and so on. So this way of hiding, it is everywhere, and that was something that I'm very much interested in. But still nowadays, this part is forgotten, or minimized, and people just say, "Oh, we are Muslim," or just truly Muslim.
And when we were talking before going here, you said that you came to Brazil before, right? And you were
Yes.
very interested in the candomblé that
Yeah.
you saw.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about this, please, a
But
little bit?
of course, I went to Salvador de Bahia, and I went as a writer to meet other writers or other artists and activists, and I was really impressed by the presence. I have been also in Haiti, and I have seen voodoo. Haven't been in Cuba, and haven't seen the Santeria, but I imagine this. So the whole culture of Brazil, or has and how do you say, a depth. Uh, yeah, the spirit is there. So the whole culture, what do we call Santeria? For example, what do you call music, or what do you call capoeira? What do you call samba? All those are, basically at the core, religious practices, and they become, less, how they became became cultural, but the culture is always informed by deep religion practices. So nowadays you just do capoeira as a sport, and not believe. And the same is true with yoga, for example. You can do your asanas, and do your yoga as kind of healthy practices. But then if you go to India and then pay attention to the religion, then you will see that the whole yoga doesn't mean anything if you take off, the religious uh, uh, expression and philosophy that is behind, because the practice is a way of coming, of preparing, it's a kind of, warming up, because what is behind is a way of celebrating gods and Shiva and I don't know whatever. So the core of the practice of yoga, it's religious celebration, and likewise capoeira or samba or some kind of cultural practices, it's the door or the opening, the gate to more deep practices, religious practices and celebrations and so forth. So we became informed, because what we call just dancing can be taken to a higher level of celebration and expression. That of course it's also okay. You can just do yoga the way you do, just making your asanas and breathing and having good time. And if you have the keys, you can also celebrate gods, and that is also fine. This is a level of understanding.
Yes. And talking about Brazil as well, Brazil is here in your book in the form of Socrates, the football player, and you also mentioned Rio at some point. But I found it very interesting to see Socrates in your book, and how football is important in your country or for you. And I mean, this
Absolutely.
kind of stuff.
We in Africa, we are very, very, very much in depth in Brazilian soccer, because, of course, the gods of soccer are from Brazil, and we love them and we celebrate them, from Neymar to Pele, and we all know. I've been before the first time that I actually, yeah, Santos, the club of Santos, one of the say, oh, where is Santos? Well, for us it was Pele, so we and Socrates and all those gods of soccer were family members to us. We're just talking about uh, as if they were our family members. And that is, I'm 50 something now, but when I go back to Africa, and because I was in Burkina Faso a few weeks ago, and people just talk, Neymar or Brazilian soccer team as if they're family members. It was
Me
the day
too.
Ronaldo have done this, and then and Ronaldinho, you know. So because soccer, and also noticed that in Brazil you have the same thing also. You have a real interest in Africa, and more, in African, because we coming, well, let's say, put it, and then be a bit serious. We coming to be aware of the centrality of Africa in the whole world, because for so long we have minimized Africa, because Africa was just something that was, Africa, those have been slaved, those who have been colonized, those have been underdeveloped, and so on and so forth. And now from everywhere, from Japan to, let's say, Buenos Aires or to Chile, we're just becoming aware of the centrality of Africa. And Africa will be more and more central. And the more we in the future, the more we become, the more we became we cultivate this awareness, the more Africa will be more central. And you just have to see the map of Africa. It's really there. And even the map have been this, have been trafficked, and because the shape of Africa is become, it's seen it's more smaller, the impression that we have. But this is, of course, a false impression, and the centrality of Africa is becoming more and more aware. This is what we call the Africanization. I have friends who interact. We call the Africanization of planetary issues, and we see Africa in not only on the continent, but you will see in what we call the diaspora. In not only in the New World, in Brazil, in Haiti, in Martinique, but also in Europe, because nowadays, in Paris, Marseille, Milan, Londres, you will see Berlin, you have big communities of Africa. You can be in London and you will be in Africa. You can be in Paris and you'll be in Africa. Maybe in Africa, the Africa of Paris will be somewhere between Senegal and Congo. And then you go to London, you'll be somewhere in Nigeria or Ghana. And then you go to Lisbon and you will be in Angola, and so on and so forth. You can go to Washington, where I live, and you will be somewhere in Ethiopia, because you have a big community of African Ethiopians and Ghanaians in Washington, D.C. So those communities and the continent, they make up something that we might call Africa as an idea and mindset. And this mindset is becoming more and more central to the world. That is my belief.
Yeah, and we can see that with the literary awards that we're giving to African writers. Abdourahmam Gurna from Tanzania won the Nobel Prize. Paulina Shizeni from Mozambique won the Camões.
I know.
You won an award.
I got the Grand Médaille de la Francophonie.
Yeah.
And
David Diop
won the Booker International. Mohamed Bougar Sarr, the younger friend from Senegal, won the Brigoncourt. And another Senegalese who is also, those people are all friends, because they also the culture, the literary culture is well. Boubacar Bruce Diop, who is also a friend, won the Neustadt Prize. It was given by the University of Oklahoma. So from Oklahoma to Oslo to London, because the Booker and so we have had, and to Lisbon, Camões, she's from Mozambique. So you have seen, this is really, this year we have seen, but this were something that we were talking about for so long, at least the last 10 years we were used to say, and many people were saying that the centrality of Africa is becoming something more visible. And you see, of course, in the literature now, this year, but we have also seen in what we call, the visual arts. We have seen in cinema, for example, this year, we have seen that I was in FESPACO, which is the African festival, and the best prize was won from someone from Somalia. The second one was won by a young lady from Haiti. And the third one was won by someone from Tunisia. So Somalia, Haiti, Tunisia, So this is also what I call the map of Africa, because you don't think that, And the funny thing is that the Somali guy who was living in also is a Somali refugee, and he was a young man. He's a refugee, but you know where he's living from? Where he's coming from? Finland, Helsinki.
The nomad.
So he's a Somali guy speaking Finnish. And the film was made by Somali actors, and it was shoot in Djibouti.
Wow.
And of course, cinema is international. But anyhow, you have this Somali/Finnish guy, and you have this young lady from Haiti/France, and Tunisian was also /something. So this is what we call the centrality of African issues and African culture. Because someone from Haiti or someone from Finland, you don't figure out that someone from Finland might be an African, right? And yet he is, and we also have seen that in actually there was another guy who's actually Brazilian and Algerian. I can't find his name. He's an Algerian from Brazil or a Brazilian Algerian, but anyhow. So we have those connections, and I believe that the African culture is the new vibe.
And just changing a little bit the subject to your book again. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I was thinking about the how at the end the vaccination is pretty important in this book.
Yes.
And nowadays, there's an anti-vax movement that is increasing in the world. I mean, especially in
Yeah.
the US. But uh, with the COVID pandemics, and there are a lot of people who don't want to get vaccinations, to get vaccines. And how do you think about that to see this happening today, because it's something that would help a lot of people, if people get vaccinated. And
Yeah.
how do you think about that? I just don't want to give too many spoilers of your
No, no,
book,
no,
so
no. That's what I mean.
I'm
This
gonna
is an
stay
issue
here.
that is. This is another issue that is global, But again, coming to what I was saying, that how Africa is central to the world. Again, I can link to that issue, because in Africa we have been used to live with pandemics, and those pandemics will not go away tomorrow. If even if this COVID come to an end, then you have another generation of COVID and so on. So the point is that we will have to live with the pandemics, and in Africa we have been living for so many years. For example, the pandemics of malaria, for example. So,
Hmm.
or so you have to live with that, but it doesn't mean that you don't do your job. I'm just meaning that the only way that we can come to an end is a global responsible response, and then you have to give vaccine for free for everyone. So that is the global solution. So the only way of just saying those who don't accept the vaccines have to be discriminated is not the point. It will not heal. Of course, you're making a point that I used to, that is coming to the novel. Because the novel is, as you said, you true to. I was not explaining the novel that way, but the novel is also how do you say, echoing what happening today, because the issue of vaccines is important in the novel. But I, as a writer, I will not say this is the way you have to do, and so on and so forth. But I will say just that pandemics will be there for so long, and in Africa we have lived with pandemics, and we you can get inspiration from some of the ways in which Africans have faced pandemics. The most recent pandemics in Africa was Ebola. A friend of mine, have made a novel on Ebola. But then you face those pandemics with solidarity, not with discrimination and blaming and so on. We have to come together, because if you don't give free vaccines and the copyright, for vaccine, not just for the companies but for for the whole world, that is what I call true solidarity, and that is only the way you can overcome those pandemics. Because if it's just a business making, if you don't give to anyone, so the anyhow, this is not the way you deal with. Let's say with solidarity, with true solidarity.
And how did you? We're still in the pandemic, but how are you living in this in the last 2 years? Were you in the US
Yeah, yeah,
taking
yeah, yeah. I have.
online classes? How's that?
That's why COVID is not the friend of the nomads,
No,
because
not at all.
you're not traveling. So I was teaching from distance. I was a Zoom, because I have my students in George Washington University. Uh, but I was making most of, I was teaching from distance. So and luckily for us, this semester my colleagues and my students were together. But I will see next semester what will come out. But I love teaching, and I love teaching online, but I love teaching mostly in person, because the true teaching is in person.
And did you write during the pandemic?
I I I I have a new novel, actually, a new novel. So maybe Tabla will be interested.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, the novel that will come out in next September, what we call La Rentrée in France, in Paris, is a kind of sequel to this novel.
Oh, great.
So we continuing the discussion between the father and Bea, but this time Bea has some health issues, and father is teaching in Washington. So the connection of the father and daughter discussion is also how do you say global, because one is separate from the other, and so they're mainly talking through social media and also writing and dealing with social media. So the conversation is became different, let's say.
And do you use this kind of the social media format language in the
A
book?
bit, yeah,
A
a
bit,
bit, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And talking about that, there's a part of your book that you give three advices to your daughter when she's
Yeah,
to write.
yeah, yeah.
One is to respect the grammatical rules. The other one is to alternate long phrases and short phrases, and use your own knowledge. And in case you're panicking, use your imagination.
Yeah.
So, is this the kind of recommendation that you would give for anyone who's trying to write a novel or a short story?
Yeah. It was also a way of yeah, actually, yeah. Well, if I were to give some novel of some recommendations, the first one will be read a lot. Because if you want to write, you have to read a lot, a lot, a lot, and read discriminately. Read high literature, low literature, novels, but also what we call mangas, and what we call
Mm,
comic strips. All kinds of, because in Africa this is the way I was schooled, because I didn't have a proper library and I didn't have a list. So sometimes I was reading a bit of what we call comic strips. Hard-boiled comic strip that is very badly translated, and then you have a piece of French classical novel like Albert Camus or Alfred Dumas or so on. So we were mixing all those levels of reading, as if you were reading Tolstoy on one hand, and then you were reading manga, and then you were reading some high literature, and then low literature, and fiction and poetry, and we were mixing all together. So I would say read every type of literature, then and then try to write personally something from write something close to you. If you want to impress and write like, let's say, a la Montesquieu or a la blah blah blah, a la George Amado, you will be lost. So write something that you're intimate and close to, and then write again. And of course it will not be it will take some time before you find your own trick and your own voice, but just keep writing. It's like a soccer. If people are just saying, look at soccer. For example, you say, oh, this one is striking penalties, but you know how many times player play and shoot penalties and so on and so forth. They do daily, basically. How many times you kick a penalty, and you shoot to the goal, and how many times you run after a ball, and how many times you fall and just tumble and fall and tumble and fall. It's just writing. Just keep it doing.
great. And do you have any of your books that you'd like to see translated in Brazil, apart from this one that is the kind of the sequel to
Yeah,
this
but
one?
the of course, actually, I have another book that is in also in. Yeah, there is one that is I want to. It's my most well-known novel so far. It's called In the United States of Africa. It's a kind
Os
of
États-Unis d'Afrique.
yeah, and it's just I reverse the world, and the Western world is poor, and Africa is the hegemony, and everyone want to immigrate in Africa. And of course, white people just are striking and say, "I'm from Switzerland. I want to go to Africa and find a job." So it's really fun, and it's also philosophical because I'm always fun, and then it's say, "Oh, this guy is making jokes," and then you say, "Oh, maybe it's a bit profound. Maybe we'll pay attention to the message," and so on and so forth.
So we hope that it can be more translated more here in Brazil, and then maybe you could come here, right?
Absolutely.
At some point. Oh, and
Mira,
we have another question. It's about the importance of returning, of the return in your book and your personal life. Yes, that's a good question. I think to go back to Djibouti and do you feel like an exile? You know, like Edward Said talks about it. You know.
yeah. That's why Edward Said was close to me. I mean, I was close to that mood because the whole question of the loss, the loss of a land, and we also see with the Palestinian literature, how in the Palestinian culture, the olive tree, a piece of land, and for memories and generation of memories, keeping. Uh, so those, I know those kind of feelings, the loss and the nostalgia and the longing for return. And of course, I keep returning to the place of return. As Samira will say, I have been. One of my last novel was also a return. Some two people who were returning to their country and trying to face uh, and to find ways in which they will connect with their country again. And so the question of return, yeah, of course, it's a desire that is always there, because the very fact that you leave a place, it's also concomitant, to the desire of return. So this leaving and returning, it's the process of life. Uh, in safar, as we say in Arabic,
Mhm.
the, so we always traveling, yes, and the return is important.
And do you go a lot to Djibouti
Are
or
you coming? No, 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 no. I used to go in the past for a short period, but nowadays I'm truly persona non grata. So I haven't seen my country since 2007, and because the ways in which I live and what I write is becoming problematic to them. So for them, I'm just a kind of
oh really?
uh,
So you have like a political problems
yeah, yeah,
with
yeah, yeah,
to
absolutely.
go back?
Yeah, because Djibouti is a
Oh,
dictatorship. Is a dictatorship. So I was not alluding to that, but yeah, it's tough. I cannot go nowadays. But inshallah, someday we will find ways in which.
yeah, sure, of course. Oh, I didn't know that you couldn't that you had issues with that.
No, no, no. This is
So
2007.
yeah, yeah, a lot of so so writing this book is also it makes
Yeah,
it gives
because
a
this
whole
one.
lot other meaning
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
book.
This is a way. That's why also the lightness, and that's why I was avoiding some of the issues that I have tackled in my previous books, and that has, Abdul Malik Sayed, of course. Yeah, of course. Sayed was a big name. He's still a big name in France because the whole question of going back to was a Bourdieu friend and so on and so forth. So yeah. So, but you alluded to, I was alluding to that, but I cannot go back to Djibouti. Yes, go there.
Wow. Okay. Well, I hope you can come to Brazil anytime
Yes,
soon. And
yes.
you don't know São Paulo, the city of
I
São
wanna,
Paulo.
I, I wanna go Sao Paulo. I wanna go
Oh, yeah.
to Brazil. I want to go everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere.
You went to Rio as well, right?
I went to Rio. I went to, but I was also traveling through Sao Paulo some another time, but quickly. But I haven't been in Manaus. I haven't been in Porto Alegre. I haven't been in many
Oh,
places.
there are a lot of places for you to come here,
Yeah,
and
big country.
you
Yeah,
will be
oh,
very welcome here, I'm sure.
absolutely. I will come.
So, oh, everyone, Laura from Tabla is saying, you're very welcome. So, I thank you again, Abdurrahman, to this conversation. It was
Thank you.
very enlightening and very very nice talking to you and meeting you even virtually. And for everyone who's watching, please subscribe to the Tabla channel because they have the lives, weekly, and they're always great. And you can also buy the book Porque Você Dança Quando Anda in Tabla's website. And on Monday at 7 o'clock, there will be another Instagram live, actually, with Professor Alexandre dos Santos and Aisha Sleiman from the Instagram page Desoriente, talking about Djibouti in celebrating the Abdourahman's book here in Brazil, so we can learn more about his country and his culture. So thank you very much, everyone in Tabla and everyone at Quatro Cinco Um, and everyone backstage. Thank you very much.
Obrigado. Obrigado.